Hello and welcome to the Sky Blue Times YouTube channel. Today I wanted to do a quick video going through the right back situation as it stands heading towards the start of the Premier League season without departures so we've seen so far. Possible options there could be, the reports about not making a move for Livramento and so forth. Now it's worth mentioning at the very start that the situation can change. Obviously we're talking about players on high wages, older players that are not going to be easy to move, are not going to be top of the list for other teams to come in and buy right away. You think about Jack Grealish situation with Everton being interested. Why would you, if you're Everton, come in at the very start of the window, or even now when you know coming in towards the deadline you could squeeze City, who are more desperate to be able to take more of the wages off your hands and get a better loan deal and possibly a better sale for yourself. So that's something to bear in mind when we're talking about some of these players like Gundogan, like Kovacic, Manuel Akanji. They're the three kind of top names when you're looking at older players that could depart this summer. A bit of a chicken game going on there about whether a player's going to depart and then the fees and so on with these other clubs. Obviously, we all know quite clearly players do need to depart. When you're looking at players being able to be registered, that's one factor. When you're looking at players that want to play in the World Cup next summer, that's another factor. When you're looking at minutes, that's another factor. If I'm Mateo Kovacic, looking at a midfield of Rodri and Nico Gonzalez, Tijani Reinders, Bernardo Silva, Rico Lewis, Shirky, Phil Foden, I'd be an idiot not to recognise that I'd struggle to get minutes there, let alone Gundogan as well. So that's all things to bear in mind. If you're Manuel Akanji and you're looking at the starting centre-back pairing of Ruben Diaz and Josko Vardiol, you're looking at Kusenov, who impressed last season and would have played more minutes if not for an issue in his contract. That was reported about the number of minutes that he would have played, but he definitely impressed and has all the qualities the team would need. You look at Vitor Hayes if he stays around. You look at John Stones, Nathan Ake over as a left centre back, being left-footed as well. Akanji really plays as that right centre back. So if you're him, you're looking at Mateus Nunes being the starting right back. As we'll get onto a little bit later, you're looking at Rico Lewis being an option. You're looking at right centre back being quite filled up. Again, he has to be an idiot to not recognise it's going to be tough for him to get minutes, and so that kind of conversation would have happened over this week. I'd expect where players are told whether they are wanted or not, as well as just being on a training pitch and seeing the number of players there, seeing who's actually stayed, who's come in, seeing the state of the squad will give them all a better idea of whether it is best to make a move. So it's worth bearing in mind things can still change. And I wouldn't be surprised if that does. Just the same as the situation with Ederson, and you're talking about whether Ortega or Ederson goes. Again, it makes sense for City to talk as if Ederson isn't going anywhere if they're trying to get a better fee on the back end from Galatasaray for a keeper that does supposedly want to leave this summer or next. So yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. Now, if we go through our current options, Mateus Nunes is the one I expect to be the starting right back. Your only option within the squad that can be the right back that holds the width. You think about Kyle Walker 23-24. You think about towards the end of last season, the role he was able to play as Guardiola switched up to try and make sure that players were arriving in wide areas in motion dynamically rather than being static, having wingers out there just to hold the width all the time. You add the fullbacks in there and they can arrive into those spaces, which definitely helps with that movement in the wide areas to create 2v1s and so forth. So he's your only player that can do that. So if you're going to bring in another right back, you still really don't want to move on Mateus Nunes if that's possible. Because without that player, Mateus Nunes, or without that new player you bring in, you're suddenly throwing away that option, unless that option you're bringing in is somebody dependable enough, fitness-wise, availability, like Kyle Walker has been in recent seasons. So Mateus Nunes is a very tough one to move on unless somebody comes in with the right offer. That right offer is still going to be fairly high given the number of years left on his contract. Given that his position is not really settled in the team, so if you're a buyer looking at that player, what are you buying? Are you buying a right back now? Are you buying a midfielder that hasn't played there for most of the season? That's played a lot of minutes out on the wing as well. So I don't see Mateus Nunes moving. I think Rico Lewis is then your kind of option that can play in certain games where you're looking for a player that inverts into midfield, that pushes further forward into the half spaces. He definitely has his problems in terms of the pace, about covering that distance and closing it down as quick as possible when we're pressing. When it comes to the recovery pace, tracking back, when it comes to getting across to those back posts when you've got big distances to cover. So there's obviously games where he does fit in, where we need those technical players in the small spaces, in the pockets, that Matheus Nunes isn't able to do. But then when you need the games that you need that athleticism, where you need somebody with a bit more about them physically that's able to cover the distance up and down the pitch, then obviously Matheus Nunes is there, as well as the stuff I've mentioned about how he's able to hold width, whereas Rico Lewis can't. So in those two players, you do have options that can cover games. And realistically, across an entire Premier League season, it's not a position that's going to be the difference between us winning a Premier League title. We've seen Rico Lewis be perfectly fine at right back in previous seasons when the team was much more stable around him. And that is the environment I expect us to see next season, to see all these improvements in different areas. And we've seen with the recruitment that's the direction it's going to go in, especially when you're adding somebody like Rodri in. You've got a much better option as a backup, and the long-term successor in Nico Gonzalez. The athleticism that Tijani Reinders will bring along with all his other qualities, and what we've seen from the likes of Phil Foden and Shirky in the Club World Cup. So I do think we'll be in a much better situation around the player that is playing at right back, to be able to facilitate them a lot better. But obviously it's not ideal going into the season with players that are kind of selected for different games. That quickly falls apart if one gets injured. The benefit is that both of these players have stellar injury records, so you're not looking at Nunes and Rico Lewis as two players that are going to frequently pick up injuries compared to some of our other options. And then further down, depending on departures, so if Manuel Akanji stays, if John Stones still stays at the club and doesn't leave this window, then you've got two options there that can do that conservative three at the back, right centre-back role. To limited minutes, of course, in John Stones' case with his availability, but this is not somebody that's going to be playing week in, week out, even if he does stay. So it's not like you've got somebody getting run into the ground and into another position. This is somebody that is a depth choice that is there when needed. Manuel Akanji, as I've mentioned a bit earlier, when it comes to playing as a right centre-back, it's much further down the pecking order. It's not somebody that's going to be run into the ground and needed as a right centre-back all the time. So you've got more than enough options there to cover different situations, whether you want somebody athletic up and down the touchline holding the width in Matheus Nunes, whether you want somebody that has the ability in the pockets, in the small spaces, to pull markers around, to pull the opposition players, find that little bits of space in and around the box. Rico Lewis can do that. Those kind of rotations with the other attacking midfield players, absolutely he can do that role. You've got somebody like Manuel Akanji or John Stones that can do a job as a more defensive right back that slots in as a right centre back, and so when you're looking at those three options there, you cover most situations that you will face across an entire season. So I wouldn't be in a rush to bring somebody in that's not ideal. When we're looking at those three players, we're trying to find somebody that can offer you the versatility of coming inside, like Rico Lewis can. We're looking at somebody that can be as defensively solid as the likes of Akanji and Stones can be, if they're sat back deep as a right back and join a back three, give you those kind of options. And then is also able to provide what Matheus Nunes can do, which is getting up and down the touchline with the physicality to close the distance when you need to press the opposition players and apply pressure, to sustain it for 90 minutes, to be able to give you those overlapping and underlapping runs, to get into the box, able to deliver crosses. You're looking for somebody that ticks all of those boxes, not a short-term option that ticks some of them and is coming into the squad to replace somebody like Rico Lewis, but then in a year's time we've still not got our long-term successor as a right back. So that's something I'd bear in mind, that they'll have to wait on that. And a big part to play in that is the homegrown situation, the non-homegrown players in specifically. They don't have at the moment the room to be able to bring in a non-homegrown right back. So I'd bear in mind that although they've not made the move for players at the moment, they definitely will have players in mind that are non-homegrown players that could do the job, but do bring with some risk to them, as I'll touch on a little bit later. So that's something to remember. But when you're looking at the non-homegrown spots, there isn't them there. I'm looking at the likes of Akanji, Kovacic, and Ilkay Gundogan as one of those players must leave this summer, even if we loan out Vitor Reis, Claudio Echeverri, and Sverre Nipon. Even if all of those players leave on loan, you still need one of those players to go to meet the squad limit. That's not including to then get extra space. So you need another player on top to go to then open up that space. So when you're looking at the options that City could go in the market For a right back, at the moment, they don't have that room in the squad to be able to make those moves. They are stuck in that regard. James Trafford has made the departures easier, but still when it comes to the incomings, there isn't the space to bring a player in. There only was a route into the team if that player was homegrown, which is why, one of the reasons why Livramento would have been that first and only top choice for them, because he's homegrown, could come straight in away, and you don't have to move on a non-homegrown player. As well as that, he ticks all those boxes I've mentioned as somebody that can move inside, that can provide you those lapping runs, that is defensively solid, that's athletic, gets up and down the touchline. Livramento ticks every single box. There's no doubt why he was that number one choice. But then if we're going to look at other players that are non-homegrown, the likes of Martin Fernandez, who's not played more than 2,000 minutes in the league, is 19. You've got Juanlu Sanchez that's played a lot of minutes for Sevilla. I know American Citizen's a big fan of the player. Technical player, playing lots of positions. Again, a player that when you look at last season has not played more than 500 minutes at right back last time I checked. I believe in the season before that he played just around 1,000 minutes as a right back. So he's played as a winger, as a midfielder, as a wing back, as a right back as well. So you've got a player there that you're a little bit unsure on whether he would definitely fit that. Coming straight in, still being a young player and not having set a few seasons at right back. Vanderson, I think, as well as he has done for Monaco, is somebody that I wouldn't be entirely confident being an upgrade defensively on Matheus Nunes and then still be lacking in the final third. So you're not finding that upgrade, as I mentioned, across all the different faults that Nunes, Lewis, Akanji, etc. have. You're not finding somebody that ticks all the boxes. So if you're not going to be able to do that and be confident in that player, then I would definitely hold fire until you find that right player and not make the mistake of when we bought Matheus Nunes a few summers ago, last minute of the window because we needed a midfielder, and then you bring in somebody that ended up not being a midfielder option for you, and not being trusted by Pep, not being the right fit compared to somebody like Paquetá and Bellingham, etc. So you don't want to find yourself in that situation. Some of the other players that I've highlighted in a table that you'll find on the X account, the likes of Reed that's playing for Feyenoord, that's one good season for them, but it's in the Eredivisie, a league that's not necessarily the best physically, but that's one season for a 19-year-old, so you're taking a lot of risk bringing that player in just off one season. You'd like to see a bit more. Jurien Timber, that went to Arsenal, done exceptionally well despite his injury, is somebody that's played a lot of seasons before he made that move. It wasn't one season and then he was off, so you had a lot of evidence, a bigger sample size to be confident of. Jed Spence, somebody that the people have mentioned a few times, I think would give you more defensively. I don't think you've got a particularly big sample size. We're talking about one season in the Premier League where he started off not trusted by Ange Postecoglou and slowly worked his way into the team. But when you're looking at the final third, I don't think you're looking at a particular improvement on Matheus Nunes if this is the player you want to come in and be the long-term right back. We're talking 5+ years as the starter, playing 3,000 plus minutes. And I know a few people have mentioned Bellanova, 25, plays for Atalanta, would tick a lot of boxes going forward, his ability to press, so on. Seen mixed kind of reports on his defensive ability. Somebody that's played a lot of minutes as a wing back. So there's a lot of things in there that I've mentioned on that player that stand out. Being 25, having multiple seasons in the Serie A, that then ticks a lot more boxes. When you look at the right backs and left backs that Manchester City brought in, they're players that have played a lot of minutes already, even if they are young. So Livramento would still come in with 2 years experience in the Premier League. Ryan Aït-Nouri just turned 24 but has 3+ years in the Premier League with Wolves. So they're not going to buy players, in my opinion, that are very unexperienced for these positions at fullback. You do need a little bit more about you. So a Martin Fernandez, when it comes to next summer, that's got 2 seasons under his belt at Porto, is a very different prospect to the player he is now, where, as I mentioned, he's barely played over 1,500 minutes, if that. And from everything I've heard from people I've spoke to, as well as what I've watched, this is somebody that's impressive going forward, but still has some work to do defensively. And when I go back to the start of the video, you're looking for somebody that's an improvement on Matheus Nunes, Lewis and Akanji. You need to improve on all of their faults to be a long-term successor for Manchester City. And when we're looking at those options, they all come with risk. And then on top of that, you don't have the non-homegrown space to even bring in and take those risks on those players. So that's just the situation that Manchester City find them in. But as I come to the end of the video, I don't think those options, Nunes, Lewis, Akanji, Stones, etc., are ones that will define Manchester City over the season to win the Premier League title. There's enough options there to cover all sorts of different games, ones that can be trusted to do certain roles across different games. As well as that, I expect the team to be much better around these players to give them that stable environment to perform. Mateus Nunes, obviously early to playing that fullback role, is only going to have more and more time to fit into that position. And if you're thinking for him personally, this is an opportunity for him to find himself a starting spot in the team for Manchester City, playing at the highest level, playing 3,000 plus minutes. I think for him personally, he's going to be looking at this as an opportunity to be a regular starter for the team, and we'll take it seriously if that is the player that we get playing full time going into the season. And he's shown plenty of promise last season towards the end that he can take on that role, and especially in the Club World Cup, I thought you definitely saw an improvement. And then last thing I just wanted to mention, Kusenov gets thrown around quite a bit. He's exceptional as a recovery defender, so that's getting back and across to deal with a winger getting in behind and make that challenge. You want that pace in the back line, and eventually he'll be there as a successor to Diaz, I expect. But he's not somebody that's comfortable pushing high along the touchline as a right back would. Much less comfortable than the likes of John Stones and Manuel Akanji would be in that position. He's not somebody that's agile when it comes to 1v1 defending out wide against some of the tricky wingers. Although he may have the strength, he's not got the agility to deal with those sort of players when you're tight on the touchline and you've got to twist and turn, etc. With these kind of tricky players. He's not somebody comfortable pressing high up the pitch, needing to get close to players, knowing when to apply pressure, when not to apply pressure, when to make that challenge. Those kind of situations are not familiar to him, and he doesn't have the best skill set to be able to deal with those situations. So he's not somebody I would be considering as a right back option. I would be looking at the other options that I mentioned earlier in the video: Mateus Nunes, Lewis, Akanji, Stones. In the meantime, until they eventually find somebody they're confident on being the successor, that can also come in because the non-homegrown spot is actually available for them for them to come into the squad. I think the best option for Kusenov is to play as that right centre back, to build his way into the side bit by bit, getting more and more minutes, getting more comfortable. Because he has an exceptional passing ability from deep as a centre back, would be very, very useful in that position. And then having that recovery place in the back line if the teams are trying to play over the top. So that's where I would be looking at for Kusenov. I wouldn't be considering him in as a right back for all the reasons that I've mentioned there. I think all the shots on options are more than fine for next season if that's the position we find ourselves in. But right now it's all about having to create a non-homegrown spot space to then bring in somebody that they feel they can take a risk on. To be able to do that, you need to move players on, and that's what we're waiting for. So if you think there's anything I've missed, anything you're unsure on what I've said, concerns, you feel differently about the players that I've spoken about being short-term options, then by all means mention them down below. I know people talk about Dumfries being really good going forward, but then when you ask them about going backwards, it's not an upgrade on the likes of Nunes and Lewis, Akanji and Stones across a full season. Would be expensive, older player, 29, etc. Just not what you want to be doing if you're trying to find your long-term solution. You're not making this big marginal upgrade in that player. But yeah, by all means, let me know your suggestions down below. Anything you're concerned about, I'll jump in and answer your questions. Make sure you like the video to help support the channel. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video. And we'll be back with plenty more content this week.